Could you do a thumbs up if you can hear? Wonderful. I'm seeing that. Wonderful. Thank you. We'll just give it another minute or two because I'm seeing the numbers are going up. It's absolutely wonderful to see so many of you. Thank you. Okay, Sheila, you say you can't hear. Do you want to just check on your PC settings? You might have muted the volume previously. If you could check that. I believe at our end, it should be all green light on the audio. Okay, I think we are good to start. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Let's go. Elle, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So a few housekeeping issues before we begin. May I request everyone to please mute their microphones unless they're speaking. Could you do that, please, everyone? Mute your microphones. And we have, hi, Lorna, good to have you. We have a AI live translation tool. Could you please click on the link that Eleonora has just shared in the chat? If you could click on that, or you have the option of also scanning the QR code on the screen. This will take you to an artificial intelligence enabled simultaneous translation tool, and you will be able to select the language that you are more comfortable in. You can hear in the language of your choice out of 50 options, and you can also read the captions on the device that you're using. So may I encourage everyone to take a moment to please join on Wordly if you're not comfortable with English. The point of these sessions is to make the webinars as widely accessible as possible to everyone, regardless of where they come from, the language they use, and the level of maturity their patient organization is at. So, all right, I see Guido's text via his note taker. So we'll start straight away with some housekeeping. I encourage everyone to be present and engaged. While the distractions are many when you're on a computer or your phone, I encourage you to be as contributory, participative, and engaged as you can. And I promise I will try to give you the content that makes it possible for you to engage. Keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. Please speak only when invited to do so. If you have any comments, please keep them as brief as possible so we can maintain the time. We can manage time best. Please keep your comments, questions, feedback coming all the time, anytime. I will do my best. The team will do its best to respond to your questions and comments as much as possible. This will make our session interactive, and I would love it if you were to keep your comments coming. The session is being recorded, and let's get started to another interesting session. Next slide. Thank you. So why are we here? I think the main reason for why you have carved out 60 minutes of your time today, and our speakers have generously contributed their time, is for this one webinar in a series, which we passionately believe in. The PEOF team and DEBRA International and DEBRA Singapore passionately believe that it is absolutely imperative that we continue to engage and enhance the advocacy skills of our communities, our colleagues, our partners in our advocacy for health outcomes for a more equitable world. So this is a series of webinars, and we do this webinar series called DEBRA PEOF PE 101 series in partnership with PEFND. I'm going to be moderating the sessions. This is the second in a series of 4. I maintain very strongly that patient engagement, which has become a bit of a catchphrase that everyone speaks about, is something we need to evaluate and assess. What is patient engagement? And we discussed this in the previous webinar, that it is both a right of a patient to have participation in and ownership of. I apologize, I just realized I'm speaking very fast. And so those of you who are using Wordly may need some time to process. I will try to speak slower. So going back to what I was saying, patient engagement should be a right. Absolutely, it should be a right. Patients should have a say in their health decision-making. They should be able to engage with their clinicians and other health stakeholders. But at the same time, this right comes with a responsibility. The responsibility of managing your health, not just treating, not just adhering to treatment, but of managing your health so that you don't get sick if it is indeed brought on by one's actions. So for those who have no control and for those who do, health is our responsibility. Health literacy is our responsibility. And it is our objective, our responsibility to ensure that we are engaged and contributing in an active way to our health outcomes. So the aim of this series is to reach and activate patients and caregivers and family members who are currently either not engaged or whose voices are not being heard, particularly in the low and middle income countries, such as most of the countries in the global south, in the southern hemisphere. And the case studies that we will draw on in these webinars will be mainly from the Asian region, but we do seek to engage anyone who feels disconnected from the patient community or who lack access to knowledge, tools, and healthcare systems, and to empower individuals and communities to take ownership of conditions that they live with and the journeys. So I hope with the team of PEOF to shift the conversation through these webinars. And we hope to bring all the stakeholders together to highlight common challenges and opportunities for patient engagement in a global context. Our initiative joins the few voices raised in the landscape in the past few years and aims to contribute towards a culture shift that allows the healthcare system to place engagement, participation, and collaboration at the very heart. So some questions that we often face and I struggle with are to quantify, to detail, what challenges do we face? What opportunities do we have? What resources can we access to scale up our initiatives and to skill up ourselves? These are some of the crucial questions that we will try to answer in these sessions. And of course, participation with you and our stakeholders, our speakers will lead to more ideas, generating ideas, solutions, and improving the impact of the work we're doing. So in this 90-minute session, we will be, Elle, can I go to the next slide, please? Detailing, defining patient advocacy again, or what's the difference between advocacy and engagement, where engagement is, I would say, and I look for input there. I hope to hear more from you on the difference between engagement and advocacy. We tend to speak of these as interchangeably. To me, engagement is simply having an interest. It could be preliminary. It could be talking to your clinician. That is an engaged person. But advocacy is taking one level up, where we think about how do we improve the impact of what we want? Do we even know what's the impact we seek? What are the tools and resources that can help us to get there? So advocacy would be a step up. And the definition of evidence-based advocacy that I really like, and we get this definition from WeCan, is patient-based advocacy means advocating in a targeted, that is more deliberate, scientific, well-educated, and a professional manner. So there are three elements, which is targeted advocacy depending on the stakeholder that we are engaging with, using data or evidence to meet the needs and outcomes that we have planned for or anticipate, and three, using the right messaging to communicate what we seek to the right stakeholder. So as we launch into this session, can I ask all of you participants here to give me a thumbs up if you attended the first session? Is there anyone here who attended the first session? That would be amazing. Okay, I see some hands going up. Anyone else who attended the first session? Okay, I see some hands there. Lovely, thank you. So many of the people here are attending for the first time. Well, we will make sure that we give you great content so you will be back for the third session and subsequent ones. Thank you so much. Elle, could we go to the next slide, please? All right. As we launch off, and before I introduce our amazing speakers, I'm going to invite Lee Dewey, the Program Director of the Synergist, to help us set the stage. Over to you, Lee Dewey.
Thank you so much, Ritu. It's very nice to be with you all here today and to talk about this exciting topic. I would like to start setting the stage with some exciting news that I want to share. If you go to the next slide, please. I'd like to share with you that in the first time in history, world leaders have actually committed to embed social participation in health systems. So this is a major step from the World Health Organization, and also an opportunity for you, because this is a global movement, but the power to act is really locally, and it's a collaborative effort. And you can make a difference by evidence-based advocacy, by sharing your needs and engaging dialogues with healthcare leaders. But the question we all often get from advocates is where to start. How do I prepare myself to be engaged in these conversations? Now, on the next slide, I'd like to give you an example of a consortium I work with, which is the group From Testing to Targeted Treatments. It's a community of advocates and champions that aim to accelerate access to innovative, personalized treatments. They are having similar questions as you may have, and they started to look for good practices and modules that could support champions to influence change. And I would like to run you briefly over these modules, as it may be a nice framework for you as well in your advocacy work. So the first step that they agreed on is it's important to understand your access situation. Do you have access to certain treatments that are important to your health? Do you have access to certain care services? For example, when it comes to personalized treatments, access to gene testing is important. Are those services available? Next, it's important to understand the readiness of your healthcare system for change. So, to what extent is there a workforce or a capacity to deliver these services? Is the infrastructure there? Is there a healthcare budget? So what are barriers and what are opportunities? Another module is more about understanding the decision makers, like who do you need to reach? Who can influence change? Who has the power? And then a fourth module, which is the module we will talk about today, is what evidence do you need to make the case and to bring to decision makers? And lastly, to put this all into practice, it's about packaging this and make an advocacy plan. Now, of course, we can't tackle this all by one, and there's lots of learning. So this is just a first step, and today we focus more on the evidence-based advocacy part. But if you like to learn more or have any feedback on this framework for advocacy, then please feel free to share that with us, and happy to share more information when it's available. I wish you a good session, and I'd like to hand it back to you, Riti.
Thank you so much, Lidewai. Is there a link where our audience could go to learn more about this program, for example, Lidewai?
Yes, I will soon share a link in the chat. What I share with you now is still in development, so it's still in co-creation, but I can send to you a link to our latest patient engagement in-person open forum session where we have discussed this.
Perfect, thank you. I think that recording would be amazing. So let's get started. May I request the next slide, please, Elle? Okay, so we jump straight off to our panel today. And in this session, we will be using case studies, as I highlighted earlier, of successes, failures, learnings, experiences that our panelists will contribute. So what is evidence, for example? This is something I used to think about when I started. How can I amplify the work I'm doing, the impact of the work I want to do? And what are the tools that I can use? How do I get those tools? What am I doing wrong? I still have a million questions. So I hope some of you will be on the same page as I am, wanting to know, learn, grow. So I will start by asking our panelists to unmute themselves, because no amount of introduction that I do will do justice to their rich experience and history and standing in society. So please, may I invite you, Carmen, as first speaker on my image, would you please unmute yourself and introduce?
I'm a pediatrician. I'm a geneticist. I've done a lot of research on genetic diseases, and I realized that research on the bench or in the clinics is not enough. So I moved into the policy background.
Carmen, I can't hear you. I'm not sure if everyone else can. You can hear, Elle?
Yeah, I can hear a bit lower, so maybe try to raise your volume, but I can hear you.
Okay.
So I'm a pediatrician and a clinical geneticist. I've done a lot of research in these fields, and I've realized that working in the clinics and in the bench is not enough to push an advocacy. So I have entered the field of policy. So I have participated in developing two laws, and that's the Newborn Screening Act of 2004 and the Rare Disease Act of 2016. So happy to be here, Ritu.
Thank you, Carmen. I believe the messages are that your volume is a bit low. Would you please check on the volume on your machine? And
it's a max.
No? It's a max.
I'll try to speak louder. Okay.
Okay, I will try to summarize what you're saying. So Carmen needs no introduction in the region and beyond that for the work that she's done in writing the Orphan Disease Act for Philippines, as well as making newborn screening the reality it is today. And her work is phenomenal in putting both these policies in place for the country. Thank you so much, Carmen. I will turn to you with my questions, but can I ask Jan to please unmute and speak? Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, thank you, Ritu, and a pleasure to be all of you online. I am Jan Lecam. I'm the parent of an adult affected by cystic fibrosis, and this is what got me to engage into the patient organization over the years. My background is an MBA in finance, but I've dedicated my life really to public health and patient advocacy, starting in cancer, then in HIV and AIDS, after that in genetic diseases and rare diseases in the last really 25 years. I've the privilege to be one of the founders of UORDES, Rare Disease Europe, and its immediate past chief executive officer until a couple ago, and a pleasure to be here today with volunteer still involved with you in global affairs.
Thank you so much, Jan. I should also highlight that Jan is waking up very, very early to do this for us from Panama. And it is, I believe, Jan, what time is it for you now? I think
Just, now it's already 6 a.m., which is decent. It's all right.
It's all right. Jan says, no matter what time you
Okay.
ask him, he will say this is a good time. Yes, I have the pleasure and honor of working on the board of Rare Diseases International with Jan, and I have learned so much from Jan, and I hope that some of us here will benefit hugely from what he has to share. And I should also highlight that Carmen is in the middle of a typhoon in Philippines, so thank you so much to both of you for putting in this effort. I move over to Gina, who joins us from Korea, the Korean Organization of Rare Diseases. And Gina will speak in Korean. So please, could you select the correct output of language for yourself? Over to you, Gina.
네, 안녕하세요. 좋은 기회를 통해서 한국의 이야기를 전할 수 있어서 초대해 주셔서 정말 감사드립니다. 저는 한국희귀난치성질환연합회라는 기관에서 20여 년간 일하고 있고 또 현재는 정책과 관련된 일들을 주로 담당하고 있습니다. 저는 사회복지사로 일하고 있고 보통 그 희귀질환 환자와 가족들을 대상으로 여러 가지 복지 지원들을 해오고 있다가 최근 한 4, 5년 동안은 어떤 정책 개선 활동을 하는 데 있어서 이런 증거 기반 활동들을 이제 수집하는 일들을 계속 해오고 있습니다.
Thank you so much, Gina. So if it's okay, I will just summarize what you said. And if I make a mistake, please correct me. You work for the Korean Organization of Rare Diseases, and you've been doing this for over 20 years, and you're in charge of policy-related matters. And you work in, you have been providing welfare support services to patients with, is it rare disorders, Gina? Is patients with rare disorders in Korea? And for the past 3 years, you've been collecting evidence for activities to improve policy outcomes.
Yeah.
Thank you
Right.
so much. Thank you so much. Lovely. So we will get started. May I request you to go to the next slide, because we have very simple questions today, which I hope will lead to lots of discussion on the chat. And at the end of this panel discussion, which is more of a conversation rather than presentations. So I'm going to be asking questions of our panelists and hope that everyone on this webinar can contribute their comments and questions. It is an opportunity for you to learn from these very experienced patient advocates simultaneously. And at the end of this, we have a concept map where we will be seeking your input in some of your examples, some of your success stories, some of your questions, your challenges, so that we can continue to co-create together. It's not just we speaking to you, but it's about us having a conversation that evolves post-webinar into dialogue that can continue to shape what we do in the future. So may I invite you, Jan, to give us your input at a very fundamental level on what exactly is evidence? Because if you spoke to me even a couple of years ago, maybe even today, I'm not sure I understand concretely what exactly is evidence. As a researcher in a university, I feel evidence is something very complex. We need to go through a lot of processes to generate evidence or data, and we use it to lobby for research. I wonder, in patient advocacy, how do we understand evidence? How can we use this evidence? And can we be successful without this scary thing called evidence? Over to you.
Thank you. I hope I can provide you with a useful answer, let's say. I don't have any final definition of all of that. What I thought to do for the purpose of this webinar today is, in fact, to share with you some of the basics that I'm providing in a course I'm giving at the Institute of Political Science in the Master of Global Health. So I will not cover all the content, obviously, but just some basic. And to say that, first to go back to why do you want to use advocacy journey? Was my journey with you all this was that the definition of the public health concept and to influence, develop the policy, but also the execution, we needed to and unique voice that those needs of the people. So the evidence is to do needs of the people.
I'm so sorry, Jan. I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but we are hearing a lot of disconnect. Can you turn off your camera, Jan? Have we lost you, Jan?
I think he's in the meeting but lost connection, so maybe we can move
Yes.
to another speaker in the meantime.
Yes, I'm just texting Jan to say we are moving. Oh, there, we've lost him completely. So maybe, Carmen, may I ask you, what in your understanding in the Philippines does evidence mean to you, and how have you used it?
So evidence is really information or pieces of information that you will use as a basis for your guidelines or policies. So in the bench, we have the information is the data that we get from research. But in patient advocacy, evidence comes in the form of numbers of patients, the case studies, the medical records, the opinions. So this will be what will constitute the evidence that we will use for our advocacy, whether it's for rare or other disorders. So evidence is still similar to the bench. It's just that the scope is wider and involves patients right now.
Thank you, Carmen. And Gina, if I may ask you, please, have you collected evidence for advocacy around rare diseases in Korea? And if so, can you give us some examples, please?
한국에서 다양한 환자들의 치료 환경을 개선하기 위한 측면에서 활용할 수 있는 다양한 증거들을 좀 수집해 나가고 있는데, 최근 한 4-5년 정도는 환자들에 대한 인식조사, 그리고 일반 국민들에 대한 인식조사가 굉장히 중요하게 부각되고 있습니다. 그 이유는 한국에서 희귀질환과 관련된 지원 제도를 변화시키기 위한 요건으로 중요하게 부각되는 것이 사회적인 합의라는 것에 있기 때문인데요. 이런 사회적인 합의 정도를 확인하기 위해서 일반인과 그리고 희귀질환 환자들이 어떻게 인식을 하고 있는지, 그리고 그 인식의 정도가 어떻게 변화하고 있는지를 데이터로, 수치로, 객관적인 자료로 보여주는 게 굉장히 중요하다고 생각하고 있습니다.
Thank you, Gina. I will try to summarize what you just said. Please correct me if I get it wrong. You said you're collecting a variety of evidence that can be used to improve the treatment environment for various patients. I assume it is for rare diseases only. And over the past 45 years, is that correct, Gina? 45 years? Wow. You have been surveying the perceptions of patients and of the general public, and that has been an important aspect of what you do. I never thought about collecting evidence from the public, but I can see how the success of policies depends also on the population receiving this in a positive way. So thank you for that. And you continue with the reason is that social consensus is an important requirement for changing the support system related to technology in Korea. And in order to confirm this level of consensus, it's important to objectively show data and numbers on how the general public and the patients with rare diseases perceive it and the level of that perception and perhaps how that perception is changing over time. That's really amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do you have any specific examples of how you may have, how the patient community, how CORD has collected this evidence? What tools have you used? What are the specific projects that you have collected evidence for?
한 가지 정정할 건 45년이 아니라 4, 5년 전부터입니다. 4년, 5년 전부터.
Apologies. I apologize for that error. It's not for 45 years. It is about 4 or 5 years ago. Great. Thank you so much. So can you give us some examples of how you have used evidence and what type of evidence?
우선은 저희가 희귀질환 환자들에 대한 정부 지원 현황들을 데이터화해서 이런 환자들이 직면한 의료적인 상태, 경제적인 실태를 조명하고 또 이런 실태를 제도의 실효성을 좀 높이는 데 반영할 수 있도록 제안하는 자료로 활용을 했습니다. 그리고 건강보험 재정을 고가의 혁신 신약을 급여화하는 데에 사회적 합의 수준을 단독으로 조사하거나 또는 다른 그 기관과 조사 협력을 통해서 사회적 합의 정도가 어떻게 확대되고 있는지를 확인하고 이 사회적인 합의, 일반 국민들의 합의가 경증 질환의 환자들을 지원하는 것보다 우선은 중증도가 높은 희귀질환 환자들을 지원하는 것에 동의하는 비율이 75%에서 2년 만에 한 85% 정도로 10%포인트가량 증가하는 그런 추세를 보였습니다. 그래서 이런 자료들을 근거로 해서 정부의 정책적인 방향, 어떤 그 정부의 약품비 재정 투입을 하는 방향성을 기존의 경증 치료제나 제네릭 약품보다는 고가의 혁신 신약에 투입할 수 있도록 요청하기도 했습니다.
Thank you, Gina. That's amazing. So I will repeat. When you say you dataize the status of government support, are you saying you capture the status of government support for rare patients?
환자와 가족을 대상으로 정부에서 제공하고 있는 어떤 지원 체계들이 있는데 그 지원 체계가 실제로 실효성이 있는지를 파악하기 위한 조사였습니다.
Okay, thank you. So there are support systems provided by the government for patients and families, and your purpose is to determine whether this is effective and sufficient. So you share this data that you collect sheds light on the medical and economic challenges, I assume, faced by patients, and you propose data that can be reflected in improving the effectiveness of the system. You CORD, that's a Korean Organization of Rare Diseases, investigate the level of social consensus on investing funds or the national budget in expensive innovative drugs, either independently or through research cooperation with other organizations. So maybe I'll pause here to ask Gina, what kind of, after I summarize, can you tell us what kind of organizations do you cooperate with to assess the degree of social consensus in expanding access to treatments, I think, and also to determine whether there is consensus between the public and the patients on accessing treatment for mild diseases?
보통은 그 한국의 환자 지원 프로그램이 건강보험, 국민건강보험이라는 그 보험 재정, 전 국민이 가입해 있는 건강보험 재정을 활용해서 투입하기 때문에 그 건강보험 가입자인 일반 국민을 대상으로 해서 조사를 시행하고요. 조사를 시행할 때에는 어떤 민간 기관에서 공신력이 없는 기관에서 하기보다는 전문 조사 업체에 의뢰를 해서 우리가 어떤 목적을 가지고 어떤 조사를 하고 싶은지를 의뢰해서 사실 비용을 지불하고 합니다. 그런 비용을 지불하기 위한 펀드는 별도로 기금을 모금을 해서 기금 마련을 해서 이 비용을 충당을 하고 있습니다.
Apologies. I'm going to try and summarize quickly. So you said that based on the data you request the government, you propose policy direction and to invest in drug consumption and innovative drugs, which are okay. And then you said there are certain support systems provided by the government for patients and their families, and the purpose is to see whether these are effective. And finally, you said Korean systems offer a health insurance for patient support, and the funds from this insurance are subscribed to by all the citizens of the country and used and invested. So you conduct a survey targeting the general public who pay towards this health insurance, and it is conducted by a private organization or with an organization which has public trust. Is that correct? And you ask a professional research company to tell us what kind of research we want to do for what purpose, and you pay organizations to collect this data for you. That's absolutely brilliant. That's a great idea that you could ask independent organizations who will have more credibility in the type of data they collect rather than an invested partner, such as the patient organization. Carmen, if I may move towards you, and I apologize to the audience, I'm not able to read your comments simultaneously, but I will get to it. I really encourage you to please ask our speakers questions and also leave your comments in the chat as much as you can, and we will move to the group map, which solicits your input in just a few moments. But may I turn over to you, Carmen, and ask you to share, are there certain learnings or setbacks that you have that you would like to share with our audience?
The challenge with advocacy is that sometimes the condition we have in mind is so abstract, and it's very difficult for decision makers to appreciate it. So in the Philippines, when we were lobbying for the newborn screening law and the rare disease law, in addition to giving numbers, we brought the patients to the Senate and to the Congress. So it's different when they see it, with their own eyes, and there's a recess, and the senators, sort of connect with the patients. I mean, that's the kind of evidence that sometimes policymakers need. So it's a range. When you say evidence now, it's a range from data to reports to surveys, questionnaires, but having the patients themselves will be the best evidence you can give to the decision makers. And for the challenges, for the setbacks, and
Sorry, Carmen, may I just clarify what you're saying then is that evidence can be concrete data that we collect through surveys and questionnaires, that's objective, supposedly objective data, but evidence can also be emotional, where patients talk in person or through recordings of their challenges, what it's like to live with a disorder and what their specific challenges are. And this kind of evidence is also robust.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in the Philippines, we have many scientific sessions wherein we insert a session with patients and families talking about what they have experienced as either patients or parents. So that is also a piece of evidence that we can put together. It's not always hard numbers, but sometimes we have to appreciate the impact of the disease or the condition on the family. So
That's
we have to be from science, we have to go down to how the patients are living. Now,
I understand that. As a mother of a daughter living with a rare disease, I rejoice that, that's how you define it. But can I just ask both Gina and Carmen to consider the question that Janelle has posted, and I will get to your comment, Estelle, in a moment. Give me a moment to read it first. But Janelle has asked this very pertinent question. How do you practically organize what may be anecdotal data? Where did that question go? Anecdotal data collected over time from patient support activities, patient stories, in order to turn it into the evidence that we seek.
so I was going to respond to that, when you are talking to decision makers, anecdotal evidence will be very difficult. And this brings in the cooperation between the families and the medical experts so that these anecdotes can become real evidence because there was a systematic collection of information. So the challenge for us is if it is not systematic collection, it cannot really be used as a basis for policy direction. The closer the parents and the support groups work with the experts, this anecdotal evidence become real evidence because the families are guided on how it should be, on how the information will be collected. So that is true, but we can do that by the strong collaboration between the patients, the support groups, and the medical experts.
I hear you. So I'm going to, I see that we have Jan back with us. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm not seeing Jan on my screen.
Yes,
Perfect. Thank you, Jan.
I hope I am back and stable
I
this
hope
time.
so too. Just keep your video off to save on your bandwidth, and we will have to just manage with your voice, but I'm sure that will be super valuable. So I see, I wonder, Jan, if you could respond to some of the questions that have popped up in the chat. One of them is Estelle's, which I think is linked to the question that was asked by Janelle. And so the question is, how do you formally capture this so-called anecdotal data, which is subjective, and how do you use it for in an effective way? Yeah, over.
I think yes, I think you can absolutely use anecdotal information, exactly as Carmen Sita just said. But here I will draw your attention to really make a difference again of in which purpose you're using it. If you're using it for the purpose in the medical or scientific context, like for instance, with a regulatory agency, you can use anecdotal reports, but there is a way to present them, there is a way to convey them to a scientific group. Here, in the purpose of this webinar, we're talking about patient evidence-based advocacy. And here, the anecdotal report, the way you can use them is much more open, I would say. There is more room for flexibility on how you use them. But certainly, if you have testimonies, if you have structured reports or not structured reports, only written or video testimonies coming from patients over the all this material with a good analysis, some compelling conclusions that you're bringing with your narrative, you can absolutely use on different topics. Just to take one example, for instance, where we don't have much structured evidence is on the transitions for children between teenage adults in services, or if you look at the issue for people living with rare studies clearly. So taking the anecdotal report to combine this data into a compelling story done and is useful.
Thanks, Jan. Please feel free to detail some of this further in the chat if you could, because I was missing words here and there. I think our audience may be facing the same challenge. So I really, I'm reading some of the notes you sent to me, which I really treasure as guidance on how you feel evidence can be used for impactful advocacy. So that would be great to have a little more from you. But can I go back to the point that, how do I say your name? Is it Jesus?
Yes,
Yeah?
it is Jesus. Hi.
Jesus, yeah, would you like to just share very briefly? And then if I have Ratna online here, I'd like to invite her to share her input from India after that. So go ahead, Jesus, over to you.
No, I mean, I really like the comment you made, and I found very powerful what Carmencita was describing, being able to bring patients to the parliament or to talk to policymakers. I think is very important. But isn't as a patient something that I've seen a professional, often there's the emotional element that is overplayed, and it can work against patients' interests. Sometimes I've seen, pharmaceutical companies promoting a new product and then just put a sick child and everybody just feels for it. But I think emotion is important in the life of a patient, but the experience, how we live our lives and how we experience the disease is really important. And I find sometimes it's missing from clinical practice. The data that is collected is very deprived from real elements that are important in life. For example, if it's oncology, it's you're alive or you're dead. You have some side effects. It's just they put it in the classes, but how that impacts your day-to-day activities is often missing. And you could have a very miserable life because you cannot move from bed, or because you cannot work, because you cannot even relate to your people in your life, or you could have a managed disease in which you could pretty much be active, be contributing to the society. So I think that subjective part is what I find as a patient largely missing, and I think where patient engagement could have a massive impact. And I loved Carmencita's point, because then bringing patients to the policymakers, it just makes it real for them. It makes it's not just curing a disease in abstract. It's actually having an impact in somebody's life.
Thank you, Jesus. I really like that. Perhaps we can continue. And I would like to direct you to Jan's comment as well earlier, that it's important to make a difference between using data from anecdotes and advocacy for regulatory purposes, for example, which is, I think, very much what Carmen and Jesus you've been saying. Can I ask you, Elle, to please introduce the group map to our audience so we can
Just
do a
one
wider
thing,
view?
Ritu.
Yes.
Ritu, I think Carmencita wanted to add a short point
Apologies. Please,
on the
Carmen.
previous one.
Just a short comment. All information will have a purpose. And that is the reason why we need the social scientists too. It's not just the basic scientists. When you look at the clinical paper, it's a scientific article, it's so black and white. But if you look at another paper, the social side of it, this should come out. And that is the reason why we have to engage all sectors so that all these elements can be portrayed in a manuscript form. So the weakness is we take for granted and we say that it will only be in a form, but if it can be translated into a manuscript, then it becomes a reference for lobbying for, whether it's in the medical society or the health ministry. So all the information you mentioned are all important.
Are good evidence provided it is packaged in the right way and communicated in the right platforms, such as publications. Thank you. Elle, can I request you to please move to the group map, and if you could introduce?
Absolutely.
I would. Yes, Jan, I see your comment. I would love to hear your notes and your ideas. yes, I would love to hear something from you. I see the message on concepts, especially things like what exactly constitutes evidence, what are the different kinds of evidence that patients can collect. And particularly, I think, for many of us in the region, I would love to see examples of how do we collect this evidence? What are the platforms available to us for collecting evidence? So, but I'll take a pause now and I'll ask Elle to please introduce the group map.
Absolutely. So, as Ritu was sharing before, we really like to gather your opinion and co-create with you what are potential and find potential solutions from the audience, but also co-create definitions, co-create coming to a common understanding of these different concepts. And so we do like to add the co-creation touchpoint in every meeting that we have within this series and overall in every PEOF session. And we usually leverage on this tool that is called Group Map, which allows us to display simple questions for you and allows all of you to input your answers and to vote on each other replies, so that then we can understand what is your lived experience, what is your opinion, what is your shared consensus on specific topics, or what do you disagree with maybe. So I would ask you to please follow the link that I sent you in the chat. There is a link. You can also alternatively scan this QR code if you prefer. But the link in the chat would be maybe a quicker win, especially for those of you that are using a laptop. What you're going to see once you click on that link is this page. So you will be able to see different questions that we've prepared for you to somehow provoke a bit your thoughts. I see people are joining, so I'm guessing we will see answers popping up soon. Also, feel free to unmute yourself and answer to one or more of these questions directly into the chat. But now you can see we have a first person contributing to what is your level of English, which is native. We have a B2, and now I will leave it back to Ritu to keep on engaging with you on this group map, since I see we have catch on the usage.
Thank you. So feel free to give your input on your level of English. And, I'm an English educator, so I know what B2 is, but if you mean beginner or you mean okay, any kind of response is fine. So don't be shy about having the right terminology. So do you have examples? I think that question is really pertinent to me personally. What kind of evidence have you collected or would like to collect? If you ask me, I would love to ask my presenters here, how can I collect evidence on disease prevalence? How can I set up a registry? So feel free to ask all the questions, ambitious that may be. And if we're not able to answer them here, I'm sure we'll find a way to get to you and at least point you to the resources that will help you. Okay, emotional journey of patients living with low-grade glioma. So you have collected, I presume the respondent has collected this evidence. Would you be able to link us to the evidence that you've collected? Has it been published, or give us some details on what kind of evidence you collected or what tools you used? Lung cancer financial burden during a patient care path. Again, for this response as well, I would love to hear how you collected it, how you went about it. And okay, you would like to have publications at congresses to highlight the impact of the rare diseases on quality of life. Absolutely pertinent. I would love myself to be able to do this, to highlight the impact of the disease on quality of life. And I think that that is something all of us can do. Would any of my panelists like to comment on some of the stuff that's coming through? How can we publish or present at congresses? What are the challenges? How can our audience overcome some of the challenges that they're sharing about? Gina, please feel free to give your input verbally on the chat. If you like, I will do my best to carry it over.
Ritu, what's obvious is that we all have different advocacies, and yet we have the same challenges. We're looking at, how to collect evidence properly. And that's the purpose of this forum right now, is to share how we work our way to move our advocacy. So it's really good to see that we have a mix of we have participants with a mix of interest, because our lessons are almost the same, the challenges are almost the same.
Absolutely.
I love the issue about the quality of life, because it's really something we have to invest on, because that's really what a government is doing. So let me share with you when I was having difficulty lobbying for my law, we did the cost-benefit analysis, and I put the quality of life into numbers. And this is a paper that's been 20 years ago, and it was alarming. So when I did the paper, it showed that if we were implementing the program 100%, we can save the government $12 million a year. And those are the kind of numbers that policymakers would like to see. So it's the cost benefit analysis, the cost effective analysis, the DALIs, and the quality of life are very important to the Ministry of Health. And if you're pushing for legislation, more so, because those are numbers they can understand.
So can I ask, I think the big question would be, how do you collect this data? On what kind of a platform?
This
Okay.
is where,
Yeah.
Maybe I'll just a short answer that this is
Please.
where you have to connect with the academics. Okay, so the strong partnership between the patients or the patient groups and the academic world, if they share the same advocacy, then they will be able to generate the data. So, and it's really just planning. It's planning for what to collect and how to analyze and putting it in the right platform.
Thank you, Carmen. So this is also quite similar to what Gina talked about, is using other stakeholders to help you to collect this data. Either it's a private organization that Gina was talking about, or it is academics or researchers that Carmen is speaking about. Jan, were you wanting to say something there?
Yes, advising can be really a combination of all of that. The first thing really in terms of, we think about sources of information, but maybe let me step back if you authorize me, Ritu, from what I heard, is that to share some key messages from my experience, that when we think about evidence-based advocacy, it's not all about the data. It is the evidence, yes, but it's the evidence with a narrative and with a strategy to convey the messages. So the evidence is only one part of your approach to advocacy, right? So, but that's important to have in mind, because if we are much focused only on the data, but lose sight that at the end, what you want is to take to influence a policy, to shape a policy, or to help implement a policy. So that's really what we're talking about. Advocacy, it's to influence policy. So it's the promotion of a product by a company, and a counter example that one of the colleague was sharing about specific reaction, system change. It's about policy change, change, or management of social. Your evidence is only part of the job. Your narrative for a purpose is important. Now, the type of it can be either the data or can be testimonies. The sources of testimonies are written testimonies, video testimonies.
Jan? Oh, we've lost Jan again.
제가 한 가지 말씀드리고 싶은 사항이 있는데요. 사실 환자들의 정보를 얻는다는 게 굉장히 중요한 게, 많은 국가에서 환자 중심이라는 이야기가 굉장히 많이 대두되고 있는 것 같고, 한국에서도 환자 중심이라는 게 굉장히 포커스가 많이 맞춰져 있습니다. 그럼에도 불구하고 실제로 중요한 의사결정 과정에서는 환자가 제외되는 그런 경향을 띠고 있고, 어떤 구성원의 일원으로 참여는 시키지만 의사결정 과정에서는 배제되는 느낌들이 아직까지는 많은데요. 저희가 기존에 진행을 해왔었던 여러 가지 조사나 이런 그 결과들, 이런 조사 결과는 국회 토론회를 통해서 발표를 하거나 미디어를 통한 보도, 그리고 인터뷰를 실제로 진행을 하기도 합니다. 실제로 이렇게 데이터만 가지고 일반 국민의 어떤 심리적인 지지를 받는 건 조금 한계가 있을 수 있는데요. 그런 부분에 있어서 보완할 수 있는 사항이 환자의 직접적인 인터뷰나 환자 사례를 실제로 공개하는 부분들이 굉장히 많은 도움이 되고 있기도 합니다. 그리고 저희는 이제 정당별로 각 국회의 정당별로 제도 개선 요청서를 지속적으로 제출하고 있기도 합니다. 그리고 이렇게 조사를 시행한 것의 연속성 상에서 전문 학회와 함께 그 백서를 제작해서 발간하고 또 보도자료를 배포하기도 하는데요. 저희가 최근에 진행했었던 한 가지 또 근거 마련을 했었던 것들은 그 신경학회 그리고 스크리닝 학회랑 함께 해서 그 척수성 근위축증 환자들의 신생아 선별 검사를 정부의 급여 범위 안에 포함시키는 그런 일들을 같이 해왔고, 백서를 함께 제작함으로써 의학적인 정보에 근거해서, 그리고 또 의료 선진국들이 어떻게 이런 그 선별검사 과정을 조금 더 확대해 나가는지 이런 과정들을 화이트 페이퍼로 만들어서 정부에 제시하는 그런 일들도 지금 해오고 있습니다. 그렇게 여러 가지 방법들로 근거를 마련할 수 있고, 환자들이 마련하는 근거가 단순히 심리적인 부분에 있어서만 호소할 수 있는 것이면 안 된다고 생각하고 있고, 실제로 그게 추세로 보여져야 된다고 생각합니다. 그런 여러 가지 방법이 제가 제안드린 조사, 인식조사나 환자들에 대한 인식조사, 그리고 일반 국민들에 대한 인식조사, 뭐 여러 가지 전문 기관들과 같이 협력해서 도출해낼 수 있는 어떤 근거 자료들이 그런 증거 기반의 어떤 도구가 될 수 있다고 생각합니다.
Thanks, Gina. I will try and summarize what you said. You said that the idea of being patient-centered is on the rise in many countries, but obtaining patient information is very important and there's a lot of focus on being patient-centered in Korea as well. But patients still remain excluded from important decision-making processes, and there are still many people who participate as members of a certain group but are excluded from the decision-making process. The various surveys and results that you, as CORD, previously conducted are presented through National Assembly debates. That's amazing. And they're reported through the media, and they're actually conducted through interviews. Okay, in fact, there are some limitations in receiving psychological support from the general public based on data. In this regard, things can be supplemented, including direct interviews with patients and actually disclosing patient cases. I assume you're saying that individual patient stories and lived experience can support the data of numbers that you have collected. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And you're continuously submitting documents requesting system improvement for each political party to the National Assembly. And as a continuation of conducting this survey, you produce and publish white papers with academic societies, and you distribute press releases. Another thing you've recently done is you've laid the foundation, worked together with the Neurological Society and the Screening Society to include newborn screening for patients with large myeloid tumors with the government's scope of coverage, and have jointly produced a white paper based on medical information and information from medically advanced countries. And you're working now to expand this inspection process a little more to present to the government. So evidence can be provided in a variety of ways, and it is provided by patients, is not something that can only be appealed to in the psychological aspect, but you need to observe trends and patterns. Okay, in addition to that, you also say that surveys, patient awareness surveys, perception surveys, and general public surveys are very important pieces of evidence that can be collected in collaboration with professionals. Okay, thank you so much, Gina. Do we have Jan back with us? And thank you so much for the text, this chat that's going on simultaneously. But can I check if Jan is back with us?
Yes,
Jan?
I am back. And again, apologies for this unstable connection. Yeah.
No problem, Jan. May I request you to turn off your camera so that we may be able to maximize your presence?
Done.
Thank you, thank you. Is there anything you would like to contribute to this? Jan, you're welcome to speak to any of the points.
Maybe to go back on the sources.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe to go back on the sources of evidence regarding the data part. For the part on the testimonies, it's clear. The testimonies, you ask them directly, obviously, to the families and the people living with the disease, and you collect them through written stories, videos, or photos, which can also be compelling photos only. But the sources of data can be really many, and I will always suggest to start with the one that exists. Be sure that you make already the most of what exists, starting by a bibliography of the peer review articles, but also with all gray literature from the academia, but also from your patient group. So I will really start with that. Now, after that, if you want to generate new evidence, the first thing is also to explore your partners, as it has been mentioned several times, and particularly by Carmencita, and I really second that comment, is that as much as possible, you want to partner with the clinicians or with the healthcare managers or hospital managers. So try to collect data from what is already in place to collect data, but then to use this data for your advocacy purpose, right? And really to make a clear difference between what is being done by the medical community, like a registry, for instance, is for medical and research question, is not for advocacy purpose. But as a second or third use of the data, you can use it for advocacy purpose. You see the difference. So and then you try to partner with academic team. You can also have some social researchers who apply for funding, and then you can do a social research. Now, when you do that, all of that takes time. The time to find your social research team, the time to develop the project, to apply for funding, to get the funding, to conduct the studies, it's already 2 or 3 years that have gone, right? So it depends what your advocacy objectives are. If you want to move fast on a topic, obviously that's not your approach. You can have other approaches. And here you can generate your new evidence. And your new evidence can be surveys that you conduct yourself. And here the surveys as sources of evidence can be qualitative surveys like interviews, structured interviews of patients and families. It can be small focus group and other methods like that, which you will always conduct with professionals to do it, either from agencies of scientific opinions and market analysis or social researchers, whatever. All of that is good for advocacy purpose, for policy action. The quantitative data can be a survey that you conduct directly to your members, to the families and the patients. And that can be a great way to do it. I can tell you I've been doing that a lot in the HIV/AIDS community first, and after that genetic diseases, and now in rare diseases in the last 20 years. And we've done it in many different ways, up to the most sophisticated, which I will send you some information after that webinar, which is called Rare Barometer. And it's a panel of 20,000 patients or family members who are registered to say, I agree to answer to questionnaires. And so they are from all over Europe for all rare diseases. And that gives us a lot of power to conduct different surveys on different topics. But my advice will really always start small. Because in fact, in my experience, even when you partner with an academic team, or when you do it by yourself, the data you're collecting at the end, you're using only a part of it. You're collecting always. We always overdue for what is really needed. Again, I go back to the basic. The evidence-based advocacy is to influence policy. To do that is a strategy, it's a narrative, and you need your evidence. And evidence, you're going to have your testimonies, but your data. And your data are going to be presented as information or as a report, and probably the two of them. So you don't need so many of them again, right? So if you follow me, if you really are on your advocacy, it's not so often that you need to generate your own data, and it's not so often that you generate data. In fact, you need to work really from one example to partner with the one that you can partner to collect it quickly yourself what is really missing. Ritu,
Thank you.
I hope that.
Yes, thank you so much, Jan. I did hear most of it, and I think so did everyone. But if there's a question specific to Jan, please feel free to give us your input. I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat. This is amazing. I will get to them, but Eleonora, if you could highlight any of the urgent questions or comments that I'm not able to attend to, either in the chat or on the concept map, could you highlight that?
For sure. I see on the map, for example, one challenge that was agreed on was finding the correct balance between the population to gather data. So having data that are inclusive enough. I don't know if any of the speakers has any inputs there, because I saw it's a shared challenge. I see Carmen Sita and Jihan both nodding.
Yeah, okay. So we don't see as much participation from men as from women. And I think that's a great question. So over to you both, Gina and Carmen. Can I invite you, Gina, first? If you would like to give an input on how to find a balance between men and women. Go ahead.
골든 다시 한번 말씀해 주시겠어요?
So the question is that in the evidence we collect, it's difficult to get as much input from men, but there is a lot of input from women. So how do we find a balance between the two sexes, men and women? If you feel comfortable giving your input on this, that's fine. Otherwise, yeah, if you have any experience or your thoughts on this.
Start while she's thinking.
사실 한국에서 남자와 여자의 데이터가 특별히 성별에 따라서 더 구하기 어렵고 더 쉽고 그런 건 없다고 생각하고 있습니다. 다만 한국은 이제 문화권에 따라서 조금 그 질환을 알리고 질환을 오픈하는 것에 대한 그 인식이 굉장히 좋지 않은데, 이건 사회적인 편견과도 굉장히 밀접하게 관련이 있어서 문화적인 요인이 굉장히 크다고 생각하고요. 성별에 따라서는 그렇게 크게 정보 제공을 하거나 아니면 본인의 어떤 경험을 밝히는 데 있어서 영향을 크게 미치지는 않는 것 같습니다.
Thank you, Gina. I think what you said is, if I understand, is that in Korea, depending on the culture, the perception or publicizing the disease and not opening up is not very good. So there is a lot of shyness in talking about one's condition. And I see this in most of the Asian region. There is a tendency to save face. And so we don't talk about our disease and we don't talk about our challenges. So there's a lot of prejudice and stigma. And this is true for most of the culture in the South Asian, Southeast Asian region. So you are saying that it does not seem to have much of an impact on providing information, but overall, it's difficult to get patients to give input, both men and women, on the disease. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is exactly one of the challenges that one of our previous speakers in session 1, Nikki Kitty, she talked about the importance of paying attention to the culture in the region and in the country when deciding on the course of action. So I guess the kind of evidence we collect, how representative that information is, we have to think about these steps. I wonder, Carmen, if you have any input on this question.
Well, that's why we have to connect through their clinicians.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes we will need the clinician to convince the patient to participate and explain the value of the participation. So that's one. The second thing is, if this is a formal research, that becomes the responsibility of the researcher. That if ever they do not get the numbers of the males, you actually look for, you go back to your agent, funding agent, say, I will have to modify my method because I don't have the right number. So it's really difficult, but there is actually a way around it. But from our experience, if you get the clinician to convince the patient, they will come out. Because you're not connected to the you're a stranger. But the clinician will be able to convince them that their voice is important.
That's super important, Carmen. I think that's a really valuable point, that you go to the stakeholder who's most familiar with the patient and has the trust and confidence of the patient, and get them to partner with you on collecting this evidence. I see that even, yes, absolutely. I see that in my research as well. You need to have both the insider perspective and the outsider perspective. As a patient in a community, you might be able to get the trust of your members, but at the same time, it is a stranger, relatively, like a clinician or a nurse or a researcher, who patients might be more comfortable in opening up to, because they can save face, as we say in Asia. Saving face is so important. And that might enable us to find a good balance between the different diversity in a patient population or in a country. And I think we are coming very close to the end of our session. Can I invite you, Jan, for any last comments before we close the session?
Maybe just a comment, which is at the center, a clarification, which I just made also in the chat to Jesus, is that in the discussion here, for me, a lot of the elements that we are discussing are not about advocacy. It's when representing the patients in the context of improving, helping to develop new treatments or better adapting clinical intervention, or representing patients in a scientific discussion in a regulatory agency, for instance. These are all very important moments to be the voice of patients and based on evidence as much as possible. I fully agree. This is not advocacy. This is representation. Advocacy is really influencing policy change. It's shaping policy, it's execution of policy, legislation, or just a policy which is not a legislation. So it's very different, and we need to make a clear difference here again, because it's the patient-based, the evidence-based advocacy, again, is not all about the evidence, is about the narrative and is about the strategy to get there. So it's about the clarity of what you want to change in the policy. The example of action of Carmencita in Philippines are great. And I will send you after this meeting the script of my notes, which I'm very sorry I couldn't convey in an elegant way because of the technical problems. And there is a link to the website of EURORDES, to the tool of the barometer, which I mentioned. And you can have a look, and you have an access also to the results of the different surveys which have been conducted in the last years. So if that can be helpful, and you can also reach to my colleagues in the office in Europe on that program, if you wish. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. So can I confirm that if the surveys that EURORDES has conducted are along the lines of what our audience would like to do in their respective countries and disease areas, can they write to EURORDES for the tools that we used?
Yes, the first thing really I will invite you to do is really to look at the website, because everything we do is very open. So you have all the explanations there about each of the studies, who what was the steering committee, who were the partners. You have the questionnaire, you have all the results, you have the infographic, and it's in 23 languages. So you have really a lot of information that you can use there already. Then if you have questions already, obviously you can go back. But to give examples really of recent surveys, we did, for instance, a survey about sharing about precisely about the data in the healthcare system. So about the collection and the sharing of data from patients and families, how much the patients and the families want to share or don't want to share, for which purpose, in the medical context, in the research context, for the first use of the data, which is called primary use, or for secondary use for research later on based on the same data. So we did an extensive survey on that, which has completely changed the political discussion on it, because it was 90%, 95%, 97% unanimous answer from the patient communities on some of these key questions. So it really changed completely the nature of the discussion. But we do have also survey on access to medicines. We have surveys on the impact on the daily life, how much time it takes every day of care for the carers or for the patient themselves, the acts that in the daily life they can practice themselves or not. So different type of surveys, really covering a wide range, and that's how we do it. When we conduct these surveys only when there is no other ways to capture that kind of information. And the last one was about access to diagnostic, in order to highlight still the many difficulties in the healthcare system today, within the families themselves, but also in the healthcare system today, as the different barriers to access to diagnosis on different rare disease across Europe. I stop here. Thank you very much, Ritu.
It's amazing that we as a community can have access to some of the tools that Eurotas has used, and hopefully we can borrow them, customize them for our areas, and work with our stakeholders in our region for greater impact. So this has been amazing. I'm really sorry I haven't been able to attend to all the comments, but I'm reading some parts of those, and we will get to those even after the session. Jan, may I invite you, if possible, to send a link to the Eurotas website where our audience can look at the studies you've done. And we are coming to the end of the session. We have just 3 minutes left. So I'm going to wrap up by saying a huge thank you to our speakers, to the PEOF team, and to all of you.
Så vidste jeg ikke, hvad jeg skulle gøre.
Nej.
Men så har jeg fået lavet noget.
Okay. Can I request?
Så jeg skal lige slukke det her ned, så skal jeg komme og sige.
Can I request everyone to please mute themselves if they are not speaking? And I would like to thank you once again for making the time, our speakers for sharing their insights, and the PEOF team for helping organize this in such a flawless manner. I'd also like to remind you that we have 2 more sessions planned for this year. Tentatively, these dates are September 19th and November 7th. The next session is on engagement with industry, researchers, regulators, and policymakers as examples of certain stakeholders that we engage with. So what does this engagement look like? What are examples of some of this engagement, successful or not? And followed by the last session on HTA. So please stay connected, follow updates on Synapse, watch out for notifications in your inbox. Please monitor the page, the Synapse page, and Eleonora has just shared that with us. So please do create your account, stay tuned, keep communicating, tell us what you would like to hear. What are some of the gaps that you would like addressed? What are some of your questions that are unanswered? We'll do our best to get these answers to you. And if you would like to participate in these sessions and in any specific capacity through sharing your own examples and experiences, please do get in touch with me as well. And in addition to the information you have, I'm going to share my email here so you can communicate either with the team or Elle, could you please share an email where any of our audience may be able to communicate directly with the team? Thank you so much, everyone, and really appreciate that you took the time out, especially our speakers in different parts of the world in different difficult situations. So thank you, everyone, and see you soon for the next session.
Thank you.
Sign-ups and
Thank you,
Jan,
everyone.
thank you very much.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Gina.
Thank
And
you.
Eleonora.